advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. My name is Nicole Porter, and I am the Director of Advocacy here. Our approach at TSP is to work with policy advocates, lawmakers, faith leaders, and individuals to share our vision for a fair and effective criminal justice system by promoting reforms in sentencing policy, addressing unjust racial disparities in practices, and advocating for alternatives to incarceration. You can find more about us online at sentencingproject.org. This webinar is part of our Unlocking Justice webinar series, where we highlight the latest in research and practical advocacy strategies that address the scale of incarceration. During this call, we want to highlight on-the-ground organizing efforts targeted at the policies that have contributed to the nation's prison population. As you probably know, the U.S. has the largest prison population in the world. We recognize that the realities may be different in each state for a range of reasons, and there may even be other stories of success in the two states we're going to highlight this afternoon, Texas and Wisconsin. But we want to use this webinar as an opportunity to elevate the dialogue, highlight tactics, and offer examples that may be relevant to those of us on the call motivated to address the problem of mass incarceration. As we move forward this afternoon, a question may occur to you, and we want to invite you to submit your questions, and we'll try to get to them. My colleague, Jean Chung, who is our communications manager, will help to field questions, and she may pop in here or there with a question from the audience. I also want to take the time to ask our speakers, Chevalier, Caitlin, and Gloria, to unmute your phones so that the good folks on the call can hear you. And with that, I want to move forward and introduce our speakers, introduce our guests from Texas and Wisconsin, and we'll move through a guided discussion on organizing strategies to address mass incarceration, and we'll also work to fit in the questions from call participants this afternoon. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from community leaders and organizers in Texas and Wisconsin. Out of Texas, we have Chevalier Long, a formerly incarcerated Reinvested communities leader. She was born and raised in Houston and is a former healthcare worker, and she's looking forward to returning to nursing and owning her own business in the Houston area. She's an active member of Resurrection Metropolitan Community Church. We're also going to hear from Gloria Brown McNeil, who is also a Reinvested communities leader in Houston. Since retirement, Ms. McNeil has worked with the Houston Independent School District as a school nurse. She has over 40 years in the healthcare field, and she's anxiously awaiting the release of her nephew, who is serving 23 years of incarceration and has been trying to learn best practices and ways to help her nephew with his reentry. Currently, she volunteers as a Target Hungry Advisory Committee member and a Target Hungry Intake Clerk at Greater True-Vine Baptist Church in 5th Ward. Caitlin Dunklee is the co-founder and co-director of Reinvested Communities. She holds a Master's of Public Affairs from the University of Texas at Austin. Caitlin has been a prison justice advocate and organizer for more than 10 years. As a policy analyst for the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, she worked to advance proposals to reduce incarceration at the state capitol. Caitlin also has roots in New York, where she directed the Drop the Rock campaign to repeal New York's harsh and racially biased Rockefeller drug laws. And we'll also hear from advocates in Wisconsin. We're going to hear from Charles Hamilton, who's a leader with the Faith-Based Wisdom Network in Wisconsin. Mr. Hamilton is also a funding member of the Table of the Saints, a group funded by men when they were in prison, which has continued outside the walls. And we'll hear from David Liners, who's the State Director for Wisdom, which consists of 10 interfaith social justice organizations around the state of Wisconsin. Wisdom is a multi-issue organization, but it is best known for its work to reform the criminal justice system and to end mass incarceration in Wisconsin. And with that, we're going to move into a guided discussion. And I do want to correct my mangling of Mr. Hansen's name out of Wisconsin. It's actually Charles Hampton who will be joining us this afternoon. But we wanted to start the conversation with a discussion of organizing efforts and organizing approaches in Wisconsin and Texas. And so with that, I want to direct the first question to Caitlin and to David. Can you describe for us your organizing efforts in your home states and talk about how they began and what their goals might be?
You can go ahead, Caitlin. Or I'll go ahead. Okay, this is David. So in Wisconsin, the Wisdom organization has been working for at least 15 years on local levels on alternatives to incarceration, with some bits of success here and there. But a few years ago, we decided that our state's situation is so out of control, particularly our level of incarceration for African American men, which leads the country like by a long shot, that we got together and created the 11 by 15 campaign, which the idea is to cut the prison population in half by the end of the year 2015. We're not there. We're not close to there yet, but we have had some success in trying to build a broad campaign. We tried to target efforts on upfront alternatives last year and had some success. I think we can talk about that later. And now we're actually broadening out the campaign to deal with issues in prison, as well as dealing with issues that affect people when they come home from jail and prison. So we're, as Nicole mentioned, we're a faith-based congregation, so we try to bring together a pretty broad diversity of people from all parts of the state so that we can not have this land as a Milwaukee problem or a Madison problem, but that it really is a statewide situation that we're all in together.
Great, thank you. And Caitlin, are you on the phone? Okay. I guess we're having a little bit technical difficulties, which is unfortunate. I know Caitlin and Chevalier and Gloria wanted to share their examples with us today. But Charles, can you talk about what motivated you to participate as a community leader and get involved with the campaign?
Charles, it's possible that you've muted yourself on your on the phone that you're on, so you might have to press unmute.
Okay. Well, we apologize. We certainly want to lift up the voices of the formerly incarcerated community leaders who are on the phone, and we hope to hear from them, but I think we should move the conversation along. David, can you tell us how you work to build community within the community, amongst the community leaders who are participating and leading your campaign in Wisconsin?
Sure. As I mentioned, our organization is primarily of faith communities, not entirely, but primarily. I think we have 19 different religious traditions kind of involved. So we spent a long time. We spend a lot of our effort on really trying to introduce unlikely people to each other, to get people to sit down, to have conversations. One of our first steps in the 11 by 15 campaign was to do outreach, and we almost always do all of our outreach presentations in at least pairs, so that we always have at least one formerly incarcerated person and one not formerly incarcerated person in whatever setting that we're going to go into, so that we're able to kind of humanize everybody along the way. So that's been a big strategy on our part, is really just to get people to talk to each other, get people to hear each other, and then basically to arm people with some facts. We've really tried to kind of keep, we're always trying to sort of refine our message and get things into soundbite size facts that people can remember. And that people can share with each other, that, but it's when they hear the personal story, that's when the facts stick. When people say, oh my goodness, that's not just that guy, but there's 3,000 people in that particular situation, that sort of thing. So that's a big part of what we do is work on building relationships, introducing groups to one another, and then doing popular education.
Great. Thank you so much. Are any of the community leaders on the phone? Okay, that's really unfortunate. David, can you talk to us about how you work through your analysis in Wisconsin in terms of identifying the drivers of mass incarceration?
Sure. The first thing that we did was we set out and tried to figure out not so much, we didn't actually start from drivers, we started from what was something that might be saleable, that might be popular enough, that to kind of turn around the mentality that kind of leads to mass incarceration. We looked for a first opening, and one of the first had to do with incarcerating the wrong people, about lack of alternatives to incarceration. So when we met with judges and prosecutors and the like, that was one of the things we kept hearing over and over, that we don't have any other options. So that was the first place that we started, and then we sort of worked out from there that we looked at the existing things that we had of things like alternative problem-solving courts, as well as some other kinds of alternatives, and said, what if we brought these to scale? What would that do to our prison population? And kind of discovered that if we just took the programs we had, just the stuff we have going on and that we know that they work, and we just brought them up to scale so that everybody eligible could participate, we could actually cut down prison admissions by 3,000 a year and jail admissions by like a ridiculous number, like 25,000 a year. So that was kind of the first piece of analysis, and part of the reason we started there was because that was something everybody could get. We were pretty sure we could get some step forward on that. Now what we've looked at is probably the second biggest driver of our prison population is recidivism, people going back in. And, we hit upon, we knew about this anecdotally, but when we kind of learned and it sunk in that out of 5,000 people going back to prison who were out on parole or on extended supervision, out of the 5,000 that go back, 4,000 of them haven't committed a new crime. That 4,000 of them are going back for rule violations, for things that you and I wouldn't be incarcerated for. So that's a second area that we're putting a big effort in. And then a third driver that we looked at is that we have people sitting in our prisons that don't belong there anymore. We have people who've been eligible for parole for years and years and years, but since our state moved to truth in sentencing, they've pretty much broken down the parole system. So we have people who are just stuck. The judge who sentenced them thought they were going to be out a long time ago. So that's a third driver. There's about 3,000 people who fit in that category. So what we've been doing is going through and kind of finding the places. Like I say, the first thing was to look for a place we could get some success, and we have that, and we kind of have built the consensus that, yeah, we've got to do something about this. So now we're trying to roll out piece by piece some of these other drivers and really challenge the system to change those.
Great. Are any of the community leaders on the call now? So we can hear your voices. Unfortunately, we are having technical difficulties, and we weren't able to loop them in this afternoon, which is very unfortunate. So, David, given sort of the experiences you've had in Wisconsin, can you talk about how you might have seen the ground shift in the years that the 11 by 15 campaign has been in action, and what the reactions have been by targets of the campaign and people outside the campaign?
Sure. I would say the terrain is so different today than it was 5 or 6 years ago. It's unbelievable. The kind of the very simple, now there's kind of a consensus around the alternatives to incarceration. As a matter of fact, some of the legislators who were very, very reluctant to even get a pilot program started 7 or 8 years ago, are now proposing themselves new expansions of alternatives to incarceration. There's been that front end piece. There's like lots and lots of support for. There's tremendous support for especially nonviolent so-called nonviolent offenses and low-level drug offenses, those kinds of things. On that level, things have shifted tremendously. There's still another, I think, more fundamental level that I don't think the shift has actually happened yet. There's still a group of people that's very much demonized. That's very much there's no room to. It's very difficult to advocate on their behalf, and there's a sense that we don't care how long it's been. There's certain crimes that people just can't get over. So there's been some shift. There's a consensus, frankly, we're finding in Wisconsin on both sides of the aisle. Everybody we talk to that we have too many people in prison and that it's costing too much. That's actually a given nowadays. That was not a given 5 years ago. But it would be hard to find anybody who would disagree with the statement that there's too many people in our prison. It becomes then a matter of strategy. One of the things we're needing to fight right now is that the expansion of alternatives to incarceration hasn't particularly helped our racial disparities. That in one sense the heroin crisis in our state has actually created some more sympathy for treatment courts, frankly, from middle income and Caucasian communities. But what it's actually done is taken away some of the resources from central cities. We're very racially segregated in Wisconsin. A lot of that has, so geography is really important. So a big part of what we're needing to push is we also need to deal with some of the underlying racial dynamics, which is a harder sell. I think that, depends on what people have in their mind when they're talking about alternatives to incarceration, when they're talking about people who don't need to be in prison. And that's a big lift, and that's why I think it's actually real important to have the faith community involved, because it really becomes a moral issue. It becomes an issue about who's a human being deserving of a chance and who's not, that sort of thing. So there's been a shift. We'd love to see the shift toward being able to accept that people convicted of violent crimes are also capable of redemption and capable of turning their lives around, that we don't need to put people away for so long. Those are shifts that haven't happened yet. We're hoping that what's happening with the front-end alternatives is going to carry over to some of those other folks.
Great. Thank you for that. And, one strategy or tactic that people often, want to hear examples of are working with law enforcement and unusual allies. So are there any specific examples out of Wisconsin that you can share on that?
Of unusual allies? Not a lot. People are very cautious in our state. We're very, very politically polarized. So we're having some allies among, some kind of very conservative elements, among some people in law enforcement. The district attorney in Milwaukee has become really, really helpful. There's a very much a split among district attorneys. Some of them are very much on our side. Some of them are still stuck in the old mode that, they're successful to the extent that they can send people away. So there's been some of the, again, there's some, I suppose, unlikely people among the legislators. And particularly, we've found legislators who used to be law enforcement officers tend to be really good on these matters. People who are chiefs of police and the like are hesitant about it. So we've had some success with that. We've had some, we've kind of played footsie a little bit with leaders in the business community who kind of seem interested, but everybody's still a little bit afraid to touch some of these issues at this point.
Great. And so for folks on the phone, we are still trying to get our community leaders on the call. We are unfortunately having technical difficulty, but it was certainly a priority for us to make sure that formerly incarcerated people and also family members were represented here today. And unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet, but we'll work to make that happen hopefully before the end of the hour. But David, while we're waiting on that, can we talk about the tactics that the 11 by 15 campaign has undertaken? Can you talk about some of the activities that the campaign community leaders have organized around and what the goals have been over the life of the campaign for the past few years?
Sure. The first tactic was we spent probably a year just building our base. Just kind of what I was talking about before, going out in 2s and 3s and doing presentations to everything from the Ladies Society at some congregations to Rotary clubs to university classes, pretty much any place we could get. So we actually have done hundreds of presentations and have gotten a lot of support, had people sign up saying that they'd be willing to be part of the campaign. Then we had some targeted actions. The biggest of them would we had a rally at our state capitol of 1,000 people. And I think that 2/3 of the members of the legislature were visited by a constituent that day. So that was kind of cool that they, we had enough people from enough places. We sort of overwhelmed the offices of a few of the legislators, but we had people for most of them. So that was one of the things. We've had a lot of different media events lifting up specific issues, like the issue of parole that I mentioned earlier. We actually have a big part of this campaign. We're actually also trying to deal with solitary confinement. It doesn't go specifically to numbers of people imprisoned, but solitary confinement just does so much damage to people while they're in prison that it makes it just that much harder for them to succeed when they come out. So we've had some targeted actions, some media events. We, have done things on the Capitol steps. We've done things here in Milwaukee where we've gone from one of the detention facilities to the governor's Milwaukee office and have had marches, those kinds of things. We've also had a lot of visits with legislators. As a matter of fact, tonight in Green Bay, we have a candidate forum. We have the Republican and Democratic state Senate and Assembly candidates coming to hear about criminal justice reform, and we're going to see if we can get some commitments from them to work with us. One of the things we're working on going forward is a thing we're calling a blueprint. We've got all of these different things. So in December, we're going to unveil what we're calling our blueprint to end mass incarceration. That it's going to include everything from the upfront alternatives all the way through to job opportunities for people coming out of jail and prison and the whole issues about revocations. We're going to include some things about sentencing, which is another whole can of worms that needs to be dealt with. And one of the things we're going to try and do is cast it in this time almost like in a positive light, saying this is all doable. This is all, none of this is stuff that hasn't been tried. None of this is stuff we don't know how to do. None of this is stuff that we don't have answers for. Here's the map. Based on what other states have done, based on what we've done ourselves here in our state, if you want to reduce mass incarceration, here are the different steps you have to take. And we're going to break it down. This is what the governor's got to do. This is what the legislature's got to do. This is what you got to do on the county level. And we're going to have a big rally and basically get our folks going out to talk to editorial boards and then to talk with legislators. We're going to build up toward another big rally, hopefully more than 1,000 people at the Capitol this spring. So it's a lot of kind of back and forth. It's education, base building kind of education, but then having a lot of public events. We've actually, it's interesting, for the first time in our life, the media is actually asking us what we're going to do next. We've become interesting, apparently. In past years, this didn't seem to be a really interesting topic. And now they're kind of picking up everything. So we're having very good luck with getting things into the media. We're also slowly, ever so slowly, learning how to use social media and things to get our word out. So that's certainly an area we're playing catch-up.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for giving that overview. And I think we have some other community leaders on the call. Mr. Hampton, are you there? Mr. Hampton? Again, we do apologize. Oh, there he is. Mr. Hampton, you there? Again, we do apologize for the technical difficulties this afternoon, but it was our goal to try to get community leaders on the call and talk about their lived experiences in terms of doing the on-the-ground organizing. So with that, Caitlin, are you on the call? Okay, so we'll go back to you, David. You talked about, Caitlin, is that you? Well, David, we'll go back to you. You talked about sort of now the issue is more mainstream in Wisconsin and people are more receptive to the conversation. But, you know, the goal that the campaign is focused on in Wisconsin is really broad. It's, you know, reducing the incarceration rate by a significant amount in a short time period. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about sort of reactions to that on the ground and how the campaign was able to move the conversation around that, and if there was any need to do any sort of internal development in terms of moving the conversation even amongst organizers. And Mr. Hampton, if you're on the call and you can jump in as well, that would be great too.
Are you there, Charles? No. So, yeah, to cut our prison population in half over a 3-year period, we knew going into it was a really audacious goal. But we also felt that we needed to get people's attention, and it certainly has. The 11 by 15 name has stuck, even though there's some members of the legislature who just can't help it, but every time they talk to us, they lecture us about what an unrealistic goal we've set and that thing. But what it's done is it's gotten people's attention, and that this is something that absolutely has to happen. One of the points we're making is that there's actually no reason we couldn't cut our prison population still in half by a year from now. If you had 3,000 less people going in, if you let 3,000 people go who have already done everything we've asked them to do, you're more than halfway to that goal. And then we have so many. And then if you have 3,000 less people being revocated, you know, for technical violations of their parole, right there you'd have 9,000 less people in prison by the end of next year. And that's the point we're going to keep making, that we don't want everyone to agree with us and say, yes, someday in the by and by, wouldn't it be nice if mass incarceration was over? So, yeah, we're about, you know, community organizing is about creating and raising and maintaining tension. We don't just want to be a discussion group about things, but we really want to create a sense of urgency and a sense of, and create the political will that, yeah, we've got to do something about this. We've got to do it now. Whether or not we reach our goal by the end of 2015 isn't as important as have we created the movement and have we gotten the message across. And of course, we're not going to quit at the end of 2015. We need to extend it. If we have, we really want to convey that sense of urgency, and our members feel that sense of urgency. That this, you know, when you've got a loved one in prison, to say, yeah, we're going to set up another task force to talk about maybe possibly fixing the parole system, that doesn't cut it. It's sort of like, we need to do this stuff, and we need to do it now, and we know how to do it. It's out there. It's the numbers are there, the people are there, the experience is there. There's no reason for us not to do it. So we still have some members who say, oh, well, is it going to be really embarrassing if we haven't cut the prison population in half by the end of next year? And it's like, it'll be embarrassing for the people who didn't do what they were supposed to do, but it's not embarrassing for us.
Great, thank you. Caitlin, are you on the call?
This is Charles Hampton. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mr. Hampton. It's so nice to hear your voice. So,
yeah, I switched to cell phones.
Great. Can you tell us about your story and what motivated you to get involved with the 11 by 15 campaign in Wisconsin?
Well, what motivated me in Wisconsin is when I was incarcerated myself, and I saw the disparities and things that was going on. And when you're in prison, you get an opportunity to see a lot that's going on that's not taking place. So when I was at the Fillmore Training Center here in Milwaukee, me and 20 other guys got motivated, and we decided a Bible study, and we decided to take that further than that. When we got ready to depart from the training center, we decided to establish our own organization. And by doing so, what we did, we established and got involved with a church directly across the street from the training center, and we've been there going on 6 years. And in the process, we ended up getting involved with the micro-organization, and then I ended up being blessed meeting David Lanners in the Wisdom Program, and we started learning more and more and more and getting a better understanding. And then all of a sudden, I began an opportunity to see the things that we weren't aware of that was going on around us. So it motivated me even more, and all of us, to want to bring awareness to our community, to our state, and all those that were lost just like us, to wake them all up. So I would all hold it to David Ladders and Wisdom micro-organization, Project Return that we're involved with, and I've been motivated so much to my church and several other churches that are involved with our organization, because there may be like 6 to 8 different churches that are involved in our organization that just comes to our study alone every Thursday, and we've never missed a Thursday since we've been there. But there's been so many different things that have been inspired us, and people when they hear our stories. We just recently got our 501c3 license and established ourselves, and now so many other organizations and community leaders and different people get more and more involved with us, because we're motivating them, and now they're getting an opportunity to see. The outreach actions that we've had in Madison just over the past few months, talking about revocation, about parole violations and different things like that, compassionate release. All these things have motivated people and brought awareness to them that they didn't know. And even this recent one that they just did with the solitary cell, that really brought awareness. It really woke up a lot of people's eyes. So we're bringing a lot of awareness. We're waking up a lot of people's minds and their hearts. And I don't know if David had mentioned, when they started this, it only started with like 40 people. And now we got multitudes of thousands of people that are involved with it, because now they see the light.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Hansen. And can you tell us about, in your experience, your lived experience as a formerly incarcerated person, and the experiences that other formerly incarcerated leaders, maybe bringing to the campaign, what it means to be doing the on-the-ground organizing, and how that on-the-ground organizing can be impactful in terms of the people who are currently incarcerated or maybe living in the community with a prior conviction?
What I would say is give me that question again, because my phone is kind of messing up a little bit.
Sure, no, I understand. I guess I was just wanting to sort of get your reaction to to how these campaigns can influence the thinking around formerly incarcerated people on the ground in a state like Wisconsin, and also the leadership amongst the formerly incarcerated community in terms of contributing to these campaigns. So can you sort of talk about your experiences with that in terms of how go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, our experience alone has motivated us, because, like I say, is that we weren't aware. We didn't realize what was going on around us. And now that we've been awakened, that's what we do today. We awaken the community, and we're awakening a lot of the people around here, because a lot of them are just kind of just laid back, as you would say. They're letting the elected officials just take over and go and do it. If they feel as they didn't vote them in, or they're going to go and do the job. But now they see how they need to be more involved, and now they see that we can make a difference, because we're making a difference alone in the work that we're doing and stuff. And due to that, more and more people and more organizations are getting involved, and people are being really, really united for so many of these great causes, and see the injustice that is taking place. So we're motivating a whole lot of people. Man, it's amazing what's going on here.
Great, thank you. Caitlin, are you on the call now? Caitlin? Okay. So David and Charles, can you talk to us about, so organizing, you know, is difficult and the scale of it is difficult. And we have a lot of people on the call who may be in very different places in terms of where their campaign issues may be or where they want to be in terms of moving forward on organizing. Can you all talk to us about how you all define success in terms of your organizing strategies in Wisconsin and what success might look like?
I would say success would look like when we actually really do get the prison population cut in half here in Wisconsin. I would say success when all of Wisconsin truly wakes up to the cause, the mission, and really hear the cry that is going on. When you hear the stories that are taking place, the stories that are taking place alone that was shared a couple of weeks ago in Madison, if you heard the story about the young man and not getting his medication and he had some serious medical issues and the mistreatment that is taking place. When people hear that and come to realization, look, you got to step up and step in and get involved. And that's what it's all about. So that's how I would look at that.
Yeah, this is David. I would say you know, in one sense, I'm a sports fan, you know, and I kind of like, you know, there are no moral victories. You know, we really want to see less people in prison. That's certainly a measure, you know, of success. And, you know, at the same time, we have to just kind of keep looking for markers along the way that show that we're going the right direction. So even that $4 million for the treatment alternatives and diversions, that's the fund that we really think should be $75 million. You know, that's what it would take to fully fund alternatives around the state to meet everybody who's needed. So we measure success by how close we get to that. But I think we also measure success by the kind of community that we're building. That's kind of the fun thing and the exciting thing right now is just to see kind of this growing community and the growing excitement and the real diversity of it. I have to say kind of a funny thing that I'm sort of pleased to have had happen is that I actually just today had some people complaining that we have a caucus, a group within the campaign just of formerly incarcerated people from around the state. And I've, you know, had some people complaining that, you know, they want to be part of that even though they're not formally incarcerated and aren't we being exclusive. So it's like, well, that's kind of fun. We've made it cool to be formerly incarcerated. So I take that as a sign of success that, you know, we've actually kind of, you know, lifted up that, you know, and there's certainly respect for people who are formerly incarcerated, and their experience is being respected, and their lives are being respected. They're not kind of, you know, that they're actually starting to be seen more as central to our organization and to our campaign, and for me, that's a tremendous sign of success.
Okay, Caitlin, are you on the phone with us now?
This is Cindy. Can you hear me?
Yes, Cindy. Hi.
Hi, I've signed in for Caitlin, and she's on her way to my office.
Okay, but Cindy, we're moving the conversation along. So, can you share with us the story about Reinvested communities and the organizing strategy in Texas?
Sure. I think one of the things that Texas has done really well is worked really closely in the Capitol, developing relationships across both aisles and getting some reforms passed. And a lot of those are important reforms that have helped to decrease the population size in the prisons here, but also they're kind of a lot of the low-hanging fruit stuff that advocates are going after. And what was missing in Texas is really a voice from those that are most impacted. They weren't present at the Capitol. They weren't talking about their issues. And so what Reinvested Communities sought to do was to really build the leadership of those communities. So family members who have a loved one inside, people who are coming home from prison, and as well pairing them, as what David was talking about, with people of faith who are committed to justice issues and really giving them the skills, the knowledge, the tools, and the language that they need to be able to be leaders in the reform movement. So Reinvested Communities is a 8-week leadership course. We've been running it in Houston which is the city in Texas that locks up the most number of individuals. And we are actually having our last session this coming Thursday, and we've trained 40 leaders in the Houston area, talking to them, training them on issues such as systems, looking at systems and institutionalism and kind of the individual role and where the systems play a role. We've been talking about storytelling, and they've all been trained in how to tell their stories and use it for social change. We've done work on how to engage communities in specific congregations and how to some know your rights trainings for individuals, and a lot of work around language and how to move from language that is not person-centered to language that is more humanizing. And we also did a weekend intensive version of the course in Austin where we trained 23 leaders here. So the goal is to build a statewide network of individuals who can really speak to these issues. And Caitlin just stepped in, so I'm going to transfer it over.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, so as Cindy said, Reinvested Communities really is about what's next, I think, for Texas. And I don't know if Chevalier and Gloria are on the call or not, but it would be great to hear a little bit from them about the work that we've been doing in the training.
Unfortunately, I think we continue to have difficulty, so unless they're on the call, I think we're going to have to move it along. It's unfortunate.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I thought would be exciting for the folks who are listening to this call would be to hear about the level of interest that we've gotten for Reinvested Communities. You know, we started this year just really in August. And as Cindy said, we've done 2 trainings. We have 60 leaders present, which is really exciting. But we've gotten the same request for the training actually from 30 different places around the state. And not just places where you would think, you know, people would be interested in reentry, like Dallas and San Antonio, El Paso, but from really all over. So we've gotten interest from the Panhandle. We've gotten interest from West Texas and East Texas, rural communities and urban communities, and the mix of people who are interested in working on this issue is extremely diverse. And I think that is where our power is going to come from as Reinvested Communities. And I think that, you know, our next step is applying the training, right? And so now that we have all these leaders who are trained, we are going to start holding monthly action meetings and selecting different policies and practices to take on a grassroots level. And some of that will be, you know, meeting with legislators, holding events, but a lot of it will also be around messaging work and language work, communications, really humanizing people who have been affected by the system. And so that is, I think, in a nutshell, a quick nutshell, what we'd hope to share today on the webinar is that people in Texas are ready for grassroots organizing. And, you know, Texas locks up more folks than any other place in the nation. And that rate actually just went up this year, unfortunately. And we see that as a problem. We also see it as an opportunity. You know, there's more people affected by incarceration in Texas than any other state in the nation. And so the voices of folks who are being touched need to be heard, need to be front and center. And I think that's why Reinvested Communities is catching on in the way that it has.
Great. And thank you, Caitlin and Cindy, for sharing that. So for folks on the call, the reason why we wanted to highlight the work of the 11 by 15 campaign in Wisconsin and the Reinvested Communities leadership training that's emerging in Texas is that organizing campaigns are in different places all over this country, but there is a collective recognition that ensuring that the lived experiences of those who've been incarcerated and the families of people who've been touched by incarceration and the broader communities of those who've been touched by incarceration are also influencing the policy and creating the change that is possible given where this country is in terms of having the highest rate of incarceration and where this country should be in terms of scaling back incarceration and moving towards a better approach to social policy. So Cindy and Caitlin, we do have a couple of questions and we want to get to them, but before we do that, I did want to ask you, I know you all are in the midst of your leadership training, you're wrapping up your leadership training in Houston, and you're hoping to move the leadership forward in terms of thinking through what might be possible for the organizing strategy. I'm just curious in terms of the leadership training and sort of the future conversations you all are looking towards, what is your internal sort of analysis around mass incarceration in Texas in terms of the drivers of incarceration in the state and how you work through that in the leadership trainings and how you might continue to work through that with the community leaders and allies who are participating in the Reinvested Communities conversation?
Sure, yeah. I think that what we've heard again and again in the training is that it's a kind of perfect storm in Texas in terms of why so many people are getting locked up. You have the classic tough on crime politics here in Texas, where it's a political badge of honor to be tough on crime. You have, I think, the private prison industry and the effect that that has on incentivizing incarceration. And I think you have a lot of other pieces like major barriers to reentry. You know, every year something like 70,000 people are released from state prison into Houston alone. That's an incredible number, right? 70,000 people coming back just to Harris County. And the barriers to reentry in Harris County are really tough. And so, you know, taking a look at breaking down those barriers and trying to keep folks out is certainly been central to the training. And then I think racial disparity as well, you know, not just as it relates to the drug crimes, but especially with drug crimes. In Harris County, you have a lot of people getting locked up for what are called trace amounts of crack cocaine, which, you know, leads to either state incarceration or enhancements on sentences later on. And Texas, you know, is starting to lock up more people now this year than it has last a couple years, and they're keeping them inside longer as well. And so the number of times that people go up for parole to the parole board before being released is really high. And so those are all the sorts of things that we're thinking about as a group is what are the particular policies and practices that we can take on, but also how do you create a welcoming community? How do you create a community where people can come back and not, you know, be constantly barraged by stigma and shame, but instead to try and build community similar to what David was saying earlier. And I think that's some of the strength of Reinvested Communities as well as the relationships that we've been able to build throughout the last, you know, 8 weeks.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think we want to move on to questions so we have time for some of the audience members to have their questions asked. Before we do that, I do want to extend my heartfelt apologies for not having, you know, the voices of Mr. Hampton represented earlier and the voices out of Texas from Chevalier and Gloria, a formerly incarcerated community leader and a family member of a currently incarcerated person in Texas to be represented today. Apparently we had technical difficulties and we'll work on that for future calls. But we do want folks on the call to know that we thought it was important to have their information represented. And we'll share the slides later, and if people have questions for any of the contacts or the presenters on the webinar today, you can feel free to reach out to them. But with that, let's go to questions. Jean, can you ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go into the Q&A, Gloria, who was one of the community leaders who was not able to get in on the call, actually submitted just a short statement. So I'm just going to read that. It says, "I'm so disappointed that we were not able to get in on the call. Let me say that joining the Reinvestment Community Group has been a godsend. The mixture of formerly incarcerated, faith-based, and family members in one group has provided insightful perspectives on the needs of each group and a coalescing of ideas to make things better. The group is ready to move forward." And that's from Gloria Brown Mitchell who wasn't able to join us on the call due to technical difficulties. So thank you so much, Gloria, for submitting that. I'm glad that we were able to hear from you in that way. So the first question I want to go to is directed at Charles. And the question is, given the stigma associated with incarceration, how do you find people who are willing to identify themselves as formerly incarcerated and advocate for change? Charles, are you still on the line with us?
Yes. What did you say?
I said the question for you is, given the stigma associated with incarceration, how do you find people who were formerly incarcerated and are willing to identify themselves as such in order to advocate for change?
We motivate them through mentoring, giving them a better understanding about their life, because a lot of them their self-esteem is very, very low. So when we reach them and get a chance to sit out and talk to them and share with our own pasts and experiences and stuff, it gives them a uplift, and it takes them into a different way of thinking. And that's the whole thing. It's one thing about the Word of God has taught me, is to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's what happened to me and most of the guys that I'm connected with. And this is what we do when we motivate a lot of the other gentlemen. One of the things that I'm doing now, I work with another organization called In the Company of Good Men, and it's a larger organization called Priscilla's Lost and Found. They have 7 chapters across the country here. And being connected with them, they work with people that are also incarcerated, problems with drugs and alcohol away, and they walk with them for a whole year, and they've changed so many lives, and then they walk forward as well and mentor others. One of the things that we're getting ready to do is a new chapter in our organization. We're in the process of going back into the training center where I was released at going on 5 years ago. We're going to start mentoring them for 12 weeks. 12 weeks prior to their release, to motivate them, to uplift them, and get them prepared for their release into society back out here, so that they would have a better understanding what they're faced with, how to deal with their families. So we have several things in play that we're going about to do to help that be accomplished.
Great. Thank you so much. That was very insightful. The next question that we have is for the organizers working in both states, and it's, could you describe your leadership structure in a bit more detail? Is there a central leadership team, and what decisions do they make versus what decisions do you feel the need to have more democratic input from every grassroots participant? So maybe, David, if you could quickly address that, and then we can go to Caitlin.
Sure. We have like circles and circles and circles. So we try and keep decision-making, at as grassroots of a level as we can. Within the campaign, we actually have some different caucuses. We have different issues that have committees that gather around them, even statewide by conference call and that sort of thing. The leadership of our organization is very respectful of the decisions that get made at those levels. So we do bring people together to coordinate and things, but we tend to give people, if a group of people has a good idea and it doesn't seem harmful to everybody else, the tendency within our organization is to let people go and let people try and do things and then work on coordinating. So we're pretty decentralized, and we're pretty encouraging of people to have their own ideas.
Great, thank you. And Caitlin?
Sure. It's a great question. So since we started the training just, I guess, 2 months ago now, we have in Austin started a monthly Action Coalition meeting. And so those meetings are graduates of the leadership training who have stayed involved, which is most of the folks who graduated. And that group of people is deciding which issues to move on, which things are most important to them. And we move according to, to what that group thinks. And we're looking at a similar structure after this week's graduation in Houston, which is graduates become part of an action team that has regular meetings, and that team selects the issues that it's going to be working on and the angle of the work that we do. As we move along, our hope is to continue these trainings in several other areas around Texas and create true statewide buy-in and stakeholders, and have local meetings led in part by the graduates of the trainings, but then also have a statewide action coalition that has perhaps calls every other month, something along those lines. And so we're very much in a growing phase, but the idea is that the folks who go through the leadership training program are in fact the leaders of reinvested communities in the future. And so that's what we are aspiring to develop now.
Great, thank you. Gloria Brown-McNeil from Texas actually sent in another question. She says, David and Charles, I applaud your group on your work. I know there is much work to be done. It seems like you work on the issue of incarceration and reentry issues, but do you also work on any ways to prevent entry into the system?
Let me ask you. Yes,
yeah,
we do.
Charles,
We do work on reform. In fact, give you an example. One of our outreach programs is we go to speak to kids at the YMCA's and different other organizations. So we do prison prevention. We speak to a lot of AODA groups. Some of these AODA groups are ATRs, Alternative to Revocation. We speak to them and try to get them a little bit better understanding. So yeah, we try to keep guys from, even if they just come out and had a little slip when they come out, we try to motivate them and speak to them to get them to see. So yeah, we do a lot of prison prevention, prison reentry. We do a lot of try to stop people itself from going back in or ever getting to that point. Yeah, yes, we do.
And I think organizationally, you know, there's so many places to intervene in the system. Like, I'd love if we were able to do more stuff about school suspensions and expulsions. Some of our fellow people in the Gamaliel Network are doing a whole lot of work on that. We're not doing as much here in Wisconsin. There's so many different places to intervene in the system. One of the things I try to do to keep from getting overwhelmed is just look at it positively and say, we're going to intervene in as many places as we can where we can be effective, and hope somebody else is intervening in some of the other spots.
And this is Caitlin. I'm wondering if I can chime in quickly, which is to say, I think something that has the potential to prevent future incarceration as well through this training is the relationships that we're building, and especially by bringing to the table formerly incarcerated people, people of any faith, and family members. There's a lot of knowledge between those three groups that has already been shared. We're creating, a resource book. Families are now in touch with formerly incarcerated folks who've gone through similar things as their children or their loved ones are going through. And I think that type of broadened out coalition can really help support people as they walk their loved ones through incarceration, and also support them as they come home and hopefully stay home. So that's been something that we have seen as really helpful in building a resilient community that can prevent the incarceration, the future incarceration of our loved ones.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, David. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Gloria, and Chevalier, even though we weren't able to hear your voice this afternoon, for calling in and sharing with us the experiences of organizing in Texas and Wisconsin. We do want to thank the callers for joining us today. We do hope that you found this information useful. You will all receive the link to the slides that were shared and a link to the webinar recording. We do apologize again for the technical difficulties, but hope that this was the start of a conversation around organizing and recognizing this as a strategy in terms of moving the dialogue on the scale of incarceration, and hopefully moving the country forward in rethinking the policies that have gotten us to the largest prison population in the world. We want to offer our help here at the Sentencing Project, particularly for organizers and activists who are thinking through campaigns in your own states or ways to tackle mass incarceration in your own state. And so we want to invite you all to be in touch with us. and we can certainly provide technical assistance and also work with you as you think through what some of the local strategies might be. We encourage you to visit us online at sentencingproject.org. Our staff is willing to help and willing to be a resource for the activists and organizers who are on the call. So with that, again, thank you for participating this afternoon. We do hope the conversation was useful, and we look forward to having more conversations like this going forward. And so thank you.